Sad. From HYPEBEAST Radio, I'm Jeff Staple, and this is The Business of Hype, a show about creative entrepreneurs, brand builders, innovators, and the realities behind the dreams they've built. All right, so here we are. We are all gathered in a room right now. We are about to embark on a really cool episode of The Business of Hype. We're in a season break right now. We're preparing for season 7, just wrapped up season 6. And as you guys who are listening know, sometimes I occasionally like to throw in a bonus episode. And one of the questions that we get pretty often on the show is how we actually go about making the show itself. So for this episode, what we've done is we've gathered in everyone that is responsible for making the Business of Hype podcast. We've now brought them to the other side of the microphone where they're going to be talking to us and telling us what they do and how they contribute to the show. So we're all sitting in a room right now together, and I think it goes without saying that it should be pretty interesting to point out that this is actually, after 70 shows and episodes, this is the first time that all of us have sat in a room together in person, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. So without further ado, let's go around the room and introduce everybody. Do you want to start it off, Dan? They've heard your voice a couple times.
Sure. Daniel Navetta, Bryght Young Things, director of Business of Hype, and
Talk about other stuff you do. Yeah, other thing. Because I don't think anybody's full-time job, except for, not even you technically, Christina, but no one's full-time thing is the Business of Hype. So yeah, go ahead and tell us everything else you do in your lives.
Everything. Okay, we'll be here for a little while. Yeah, so I am primarily a filmmaker and commercial director. I own this company called Bryght Young Things in the city that gets shouted out in all the posts at byt.nyc. I sort of came to it directing musicians and making a bunch of music content. Then I started making commercials, and a few years ago I started making documentaries. Jeff and I have been friends for a few years now, and when he wanted to chat through making another podcast, that's how I sort of entered into the picture here. And I guess the only other thing I do is a vegan sneaker head account called The Air Vegan.
Word, it's a good account.
Thanks.
All right, who do we have next?
My name is Christina, and I'm an associate producer at HYPEBEAST, and I work on all the HYPEBEAST radio stuff. So aside from Business of Hype, I also work on Mic Line, which is our music podcast, and the Hype Report, which is our weekly news podcast. And then I also work on the Anthropology, and I manage some social, and I write the editorial posts.
Yeah, awesome. I'm Jeff. We'll go around the room.
Sweet. I'm Sidney. Sidney Pacampara. I am the associate producer also on Business of Hype. Also the writer for the interludes of all the episodes. Anything you hear, I guess, Jeff saying outside of the conversation would be my input and, my part of the writing.
He's my ghostwriter.
And outside of Business of Hype, I'm a brand strategist and kind of content creator for different agencies I've worked at, but then most recently at Uniqlo, more so managing some of their creative projects at the Global Creative Lab. That was more so a freelance role, but then just been freelancing around in kind of that same capacity.
Yeah, and I'm DRB, David Rogers-Berry. I do post-production editing and mixing on the podcast. And outside of Business of Hype, I do other audio engineering, mostly recording. I run a small label imprint where I've released about 12 records in the last 2.5 years or so.
Shout out the label.
Yeah, Imaginator Records. Imaginator. That's my imprint. Yeah, and I got started in music at a young age. I've been playing drums since I was 10 and sort of backdoored my way into engineering from that. For from just making the records and kind of having to learn to do it myself.
And tell them where you're from, where you're based out of.
I live in South Portland, Maine. Currently, I've been there for almost 2 years. I was in New York for 15 years before that, but yep.
So I think it's cool to point out that the post-audio engineering of the show is done out of Portland, Maine. It's made mostly out of New York City, but so, it's good to know that this could be done remotely. You don't all have to be in the same room. It's pretty cool. So again, this is the first time we've all sat in the room together. I've never met DRB in person, but he's heard my voice many times. So it was kind of surreal to meet for the first time ever. I think it's also interesting to note that, if I'm not mistaken, none of us have ever done a podcast before, right? We have no podcast experience.
No.
Yeah. So I think the success of Business of Hype actually might come from the fact that we're not podcasters, maybe. We just are sort of learning as we go along, which is pretty cool. Other interesting facts, Dan and I, who really, sort of drive the show, are not college graduates, but we're making a business show. We're college dropouts, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I thought about that recently when I was posting a little bit about this series on one of the Bryght Young Things socials, and just considering that you and I in the beginning talked about making sure that we were giving people, unlocking free knowledge for people, and giving young people access to information that is often sort of kept behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And then here we are looking sort of back at what we've done up to this point and thinking about, the letters and the notes and the things that we hear from people who are just super grateful for access to that information. So
yep, this is really the class I always wish existed in school, but never did.
And the reason why I think, higher education is not always essential for certain people. It's just get yourself access to people who are doing things you want to do, whether it's internships or whatever, and you can sponge that information without needing to pay, eternally for college.
That is a good segue into discussing how some of the team was assembled. Of course, Dan and I, you were in from ground zero, but everyone else was sort of added to the mix a little bit later. So maybe chronologically, do you remember who came first?
I think Sidney came first.
You?
I think it might have been me. Yeah.
Okay, maybe it was David.
Yeah.
Okay, so DRB, you were added to the team first. How did you guys link? You don't have to go into the full backstory, but
yeah, the concise version is that we had been editing the show at our offices, and it was getting to be too much. We were putting out a lot, and so I asked one of our main video editors that we use on the commercial side if he knew anybody, because I trusted his opinions. And he mentioned that one of his friends could probably do it remotely. And I reached out to David, and David, just sort of via good faith agreed to start working on it.
Yep, jumped right on. And most of my experience is in music, so this actually was kind of new for me. But the technology makes it so that we can do it remotely, which works out really great. And
when you first started, I'm sure now it's second nature to you to get through one of the episodes, but when you first began, how did you ingratiate yourself and get up to speed of the style of editing?
It was definitely trial by fire. Especially there was not a ton of I knew the format for the show and it had all the material to work with and all the pieces in place, but not a ton of feedback or direction and I really kind of felt like it was on me to just make it sound good to my ears, and just try to anticipate what you guys want and try to make the guests sound good and, really, focus on making things work from my perspective. Yeah,
it's really like a blend of art and science, right? There's the technical aspect of the engineering itself, but then there is an artistic intangible of knowing fading out and when to bring in the voice and gaps and pauses, and what to, slice out. If there's over ums or, pauses, you got to cut those down.
Yeah, and I try not to overdo it because I don't want to erase somebody's
style.
cadence and
Right.
personality, yeah.
Word. It's definitely harder than it looks or sounds.
But one of the excuses we used to make for ourselves in the beginning, Jeff, was that when we first started doing it and the sound quality was not where it is now, we were like, well, if it's a great podcast, people don't mind if it doesn't really sound that great. They'll listen anyway. And we started finding other examples of shows that didn't really sound that great to make ourselves feel better, but then bringing David in sort of helped us achieve a higher
But content
quality.
is king, and that's kind of one of the things that makes podcasting interesting, right?
Yeah. All right. Sid, I think you came on shortly after that.
Yeah.
How did you join? Tell us.
So, I mean, I was a fan first season, I think halfway through the second season. And then I believe there were just open calls at the end of if you remember, at the end of the episode. Just
like I was saying, we're hiring at the end,
basically. Yeah. And at the time, I had a lot of free time in terms of work and was like, I'm a big fan. And they you guys started off with a bang with, Hiroshi and Sarah. And after that, it's just so many notable names and just became a big fan after that. Figured, hey, let me just cold email, reach out. Cause you never know. And that's one thing I always learned is you never know if you just like send an email out there.
Who did you cold email?
Cold email Dan, and just wrote up an email saying how much of a fan I was, but then also how much I'm willing to help support and do whatever you guys need the help with. It wasn't as prescriptive in terms of the call of what you guys needed, but just get a conversation going. Dan and I then linked up a little bit after that email and had a meeting, went out for coffee and just talked about what I was into, what he was into, talked about the podcast and didn't really have like a clear direction in terms of how to support, but figured, hey, let me just be in the room and help you guys out with whatever you guys need.
Dan, out of all the people that applied, what was it about Sidney's resume or cover letter that really stood out and like made him the one that you called back and got coffee with?
So it's funny. I mean, in work, we're reading, 80 emails a day. Exactly. No. In general, there's just a ton of emails a day, but Sidney's was so well written and thoughtful that it just totally stood apart from the rest of the flood of emails that we were getting. And it just seemed like the way that he wrote that email made sense to me. And I felt like he'd be able to pick up the ball from me, who was previously doing that role as well. And and I also felt like once we got together, he understood the areas of the quote unquote, scene that we're a part of. And I felt like he'd be the perfect intermediary that could fill this slot of like helping, sort of speak to the things that you would recognize in these conversations. And as well as he was also a fan of the show. So I felt like he was going to be this perfect balance of having the curiosity of a listener and also being familiar with you as a host.
And whereas DRB, like you weren't a fan, like you never heard of the show before, right?
No, and I honestly, this wasn't my world, which I think has really worked out in my favor. It's been very enriching for me, and it keeps me engaged because I was kind of an outsider. I didn't really know that much about the sneaker scene. And
had you even heard of HYPEBEAST before?
I guess not.
That's awesome.
Not really. It wasn't really on my radar so much.
Yeah.
But I've been, super
You got
inspired
a crash course now.
Yeah. No, it's super. I mean, to me, it's been really just interesting. It's like this whole thing to engage in, and for me, the novelty has actually paid off because it really kind of gives me something to dig into.
Yeah, and going back to Sidney, like actually, the job description wasn't like ghostwriting for me.
No, not at all.
It was just helping Dan on production stuff, and I remember those sessions, those sort of like late night sessions, where like I'd be in the booth, right, and you would be sort of helping to determine what time slot I should throw an interlude in.
Yeah.
And then I'd be writing it in the booth Like
Yeah.
I'm getting like Jay-Z Fade to Black vibes. Like I'd be in the booth just like crafting the thing, and y'all would just be sitting there like waiting for like 15, 20 minutes while like I went through it.
Just pen it, yeah.
But then I think the transition was like you would start working on the next one or the previous, or you'd clean up a previous one.
Yeah.
And that's where you started contributing your voice to my voice.
Yeah.
And then more and more to the point where now, 6 seasons in, it's just you're determining where the pauses happen, which, the fans really love. And I think the thing is for me, for whatever reason, because I conducted the interview and I was there through the whole thing, it's hard for me to say at this 8-minute mark, this is where we should pause. But I think because you're the first outsider or the second outsider listening to it, you're the one that's like, this could really use some enlightenment, where I'm like, this doesn't need any enlightenment. This is all good because I've covered it all. So it's great to have like that outside ear sort of first dive into it.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely just let me just be in the room and, help Dan out with the production. And then, once we started going or started had the ball rolling in terms of writing, like you said, it was just throwing me hey, can you just do a quick intro for this person?
Right.
Here's the interesting part of the conversation. What's your take on it? And that really just kind of organically evolved into, okay, listen to this whole thing and break it out into what you think are the themes of this episode.
Yeah.
What are the main takeaways of the episode?
Which is the crowd favorite now.
Yeah, it was.
People love that. It's what makes it unique.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was in the beginning, one of the most important things to us was how is it not just a long-winded interview show?
Yeah. Yep.
And also how do we take the experience and encyclopedia of knowledge that you have and be able to interject that and provide context for people, because that's just something that people don't get. And you're not going to stop in the middle of an interview and start
Right.
Telling everybody what's going on. So we
Right,
felt
right.
like, retroactively it'd be a good way to fill in the blanks for people and sort of, hopefully address some curiosities that they might have.
I will say, though, that some people think, and I've heard this from fans, that I actually stop the interview.
And cue the music.
And I'm like, hold on one second, sir.
Music fading in the music.
That's right.
No, so it happens separately.
I mean, there's a lot of
Let me break that down for you.
right. It's the context I think is important for these interviews. There's a lot of different people who listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
There's people who have the full context of the person, and there's people who only have a portion of the person's story. And so it's able to connect the dots between, what the conversation and the interview is happening between Jeff, you, and the other person, but then also connecting it to what's happening overall in the industry, or what's happening, what does it mean in the past, or what does it look like in the future of whatever respective industry they're in. I think that part's, that the extra layer that I feel brings Business of Hype, above some of the others.
Well, it's a skill share, right?
Yeah.
It's the educational aspect.
Yeah.
Shout out Michael from Skillshare.
Yeah.
He listens.
Nice. Christina, you're the latest member to the cast. Tell us how you came about.
I just applied on hypebeast.com.
The good old-fashioned way.
Yeah, old-fashioned.
HR.
I saw the job listing on LinkedIn originally, and I just went on the site and then applied.
So can I tell you that when you, like the time in which you applied, we had an associate producer role open. We got, no joke, over 900 applicants for that. And
for real?
I could not even, I always had in my calendar, like, start reviewing HR applicants, and I would just look at like this. I'd literally like hit, when you hit page next on like 800, like it says 800, you hit page next and it would just turn to like 820. Like between that time, like another 20 people applied, I was like, fuck, I'm never going to get through this shit. And thankfully the good people at HYPEBEAST HR helped to narrow it down to, I think, 100.
Oh, so they were filtering it out for you.
So you were like a little guppy that made it, that waded
Still are like a little
through,
guppy.
all the thousands of people.
Some people joke that you just randomly picked my application by accident. I get
Who
that.
says that to you?
The irony of this show is that this Business of Hype is on HYPEBEAST Radio, but I'm the only person here that actually works at HYPEBEAST.
Yeah, you're the only full-time employee of
I'm the only
HYPEBEAST.
full-time employee, and I think a lot of people that listen don't know that. And so everything
Why
that
do they think I just randomly picked you? That's so weird.
I think
You fought.
People are just mean. I don't know. It's just a weird joke.
Wait, do you remember how many interviews you went through?
So I applied online, and then I had I had a phone call with the HR, and then I had an in-person interview with the managing editor at HYPEBEAST, and then I had a video interview with 2 managing editors, and I think the editor-in-chief from Hong Kong.
Wow.
With Arby and Patar.
So that's 4 interviews now.
No, and then I had my interview with you, Jeff.
And was that in person?
Yes.
Was that
You
where
don't
was
remember?
Memorable.
No, where was it?
It was in your other office. I had told my work that I forgot my glasses and I went in for an interview. I think that's the excuse that I gave. And I had to go back home to get it. And then I just went to your office for the interview. And I remember the guy after me had on a full suit. And I thought that guy definitely didn't get the job.
Oh, you thought he didn't get the job. I remember the guy with the full suit. He was memorable.
Oh, I was like, this guy clearly doesn't get the culture if he's wearing a full suit to the interview.
That's a tough one, I think, when you go to work for a company like a HYPEBEAST. It's tough to know how to dress. Like, do you dress in Travis Scott's and Alik's ballistic bags on, or do you go in a proper interview outfit? It's tough.
Should we put that to a vote?
I would say for HYPEBEAST, you should just be yourself and just dress as you normally would.
Yeah.
I wouldn't wear a suit.
Right. I was
Suit.
right.
Unless you're in sales.
All right. You're saying too much now. All right, cool. So here's the team assembled. I want to run through a little bit about the history of how the show even came to be. I think that's good insight as well. If you look in the interwebs of YouTube, you'll see an old video interview series that I used to do called 1-to-1 with Jeff Staple, which was just me interviewing people that I really respect on video. And it was good. It had a lot of traction. I interviewed a lot of great people. That eventually evolved into a concept that I was working on with Dan, which is an evolution of the 1-to-1 series, which was called 1-2-1-2, which we actually recorded a few episodes that I don't know if they'll ever see the light of day, but there's some amazing content that came out of that, which was video and audio together. And it was longer form.
Yeah.
Right.
Much longer form.
Yeah, much longer form. And we never put them out. And you have a better memory than I do, so I don't remember why. I felt what I remember is that we never got the product right, and I think this goes to say a lot of times that creatives work on stuff, and it's okay that it doesn't come out. You just have to tinker and try stuff out, And we recorded 5 or so interviews of people, and great content, but I think the quality just wasn't dialed in many different aspects.
Yeah, it was really a complicated sort of format and setup.
Yeah.
We were playing music live in the room whenever someone would, because part of the show, not to get too deep into it, was these guests would talk about music, 5 songs maybe that influenced their lives. Yeah. So
We'd play the songs.
Yeah,
They'd talk over the song.
yeah, they would talk over the song. We would sit in the room and listen to the song together while we're also filming video of us just sitting and listening to a song together.
Yeah.
Which also got a little strange.
Yeah.
And there was no, let's keep this to 60 minutes. So I think
Somewhere 2-3 hours.
he's a great guy. But the Clark Kent one
Clark
went on,
Kent
was about 4 hours long.
Yeah. I got to get him on the Business of Hype too, but
Yeah, it was a fantastic and such an education and so much fun to be in the room with him. But we just didn't have it fully solved, and then getting into the edit on it, and it was just complicated. And then I think we just took a break from it.
Yep.
And then I think literally it was probably 2 years later, in a very typical Jeff Staple 2:30 in the morning email that I woke up to the next morning that was I want to try another podcast. And so at least we had the foundation. And like you said, the value sometimes in the creative exploration is you get to become acquaintances or friends with someone, and then when you want to go back and do something again, you at least have that foundation.
yeah. And the way the podcast came about was, in that 2-year span, I started to become a fan of a lot of podcast. I was listening to them. And I was having dinner one night with Kevin Ma, who's the founder and CEO of HYPEBEAST. And, he was like, what are you into these days? And I was like, podcasts. I like this one, that one, and that one. And he's like, oh, we should make a podcast together on HYPEBEAST. We should give it a try. What would it be about? And I was like, oh, maybe like a Forbes magazine meets HYPEBEAST culture, because I had spent the better part of the 10 years prior sort of inspiring young people to like quit their day jobs and start their own brand, but without any further reinforcement of how the fuck that actually happens. And I felt a little bit of angst and like guilt in that I was getting all these kids to like jump off the diving board and like just go in the pool, but then not giving them the tools to actually learn how to swim, So a Business of Hype type of show where like I talk to other creative entrepreneurs, learn what they've done, what mistakes they've made, and hopefully that'll serve as tools, was an interesting concept. He liked it. And we started a 3-episode test to see how it would go with no commitment beyond the 3 episodes. And the first 3 were Hiroshi Fujiwara of Fragment, Sarah Andelman of Colette, and Aaron Levant, founder of ComplexCon. And after that, it was like rocket fuel. It just took off right from there. So that's really how the show was born.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember just even us thinking about what other shows we really liked, and elements of those other things, like a How I Built This or like a TED Radio Hour. And as curious minds ourselves, what we felt like the value in those things were, and how can we apply that to this lens, this scene and this culture,
Yep. All right, so let's run through now, changing gears a little bit, how the whole show actually gets made. We're going to run through the process A to Z of how it happens in each of our respective parts. So I guess the first part is probably talent, right? It's deciding who we're going to interview. And I would say, Christina, you might know this better than anyone here. What percentage of guests would you say just come from me and my contacts, and I just tell you I'm interviewing this person, versus people who inbound request to be on the Business of Hype?
Well, because I feel like a lot of the guests actually come from your connections, but we do get a lot of people requesting to be on the show. But then the actual amount of people that we agree to be on the show ends up being a very slim number. I would say maybe like 2 or 3 of the 10 episodes come from like me scheduling or me.
I would agree with that. I felt like it was like 80 to 90% just come from me.
Yeah, and a lot of
10
it,
to 20 come from the outside.
Yeah, because a lot of it is like we get emails from like our editorial account, from our editorial email, and then some people will be like, I think this is a better fit for the podcast than doing like an editorial post. So then I'll have that forward over to Jeff, and I'll ask Jeff what he thinks about having this guest on the show. And then from there it becomes like an episode, and we figure out scheduling.
And I will say we should probably shout out Sandrine Charles.
Oh, yeah.
Of the 20% that come from outside, she's probably responsible for half of them.
Yeah,
she's got a great roster.
Yeah, she does so much. I
She
think
does PR.
I know
she
her.
did A-Life.
Oh, really? She did A-Life, Daily Paper, which hasn't come out yet, but
Did she do?
Sharifa Murdoch.
Oh,
yeah.
She
whole
does a lot
yeah.
of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
But okay, so talent really mostly comes from my Rolodex and who I think, offers an interesting viewpoint. And one thing that I really deliberately try to do is pepper like sort of mainstay hypebeast OGs with new up and coming kids who are redefining what hypebeast culture means, with curveball out of left field entrepreneurs that have possibly nothing to do with hypebeast, but are getting benefit and from like the sort of resonating world of hype culture. And I try to like mix all of that into a bouillabaisse soup that ends up being a vegan bouillabaisse soup.
Thank you.
Dan.
Appreciate that.
That ends up being the show. And I think, a lot of like OG hypebeasts are probably like, why the fuck this person or this woman or this man? Like, and then probably like if, we have a lot of listeners that are like CMOs or senior vice presidents of agencies, like sort of bigwigs who enjoy learning, but then all of a sudden are like, wow, who's this young kid that I've never heard of, that has no sort of reputation or stature, but I'm hoping there's always something that like shocks them in terms of what they can glean and learn off of them.
Yeah, and it's always nice to like, sometimes we're catching these people right as the initial wave of curiosity is hitting.
Yeah.
And even like Melody Asani, I was not really familiar with at the time, and now
Crazy.
and it's just been
It was
fun.
so fast too.
Yeah.
So I just caught up with Melody recently in real life, and I asked her because she just dropped the Jordan 1 collaboration, and I asked her when we interviewed, were you already in meetings with Jordan and you knew that this was coming up, but you couldn't say anything because of an NDA or something? She's like, no, I never even met Nike yet. And in that short amount of time, she went from not knowing anyone at Nike to dropping an Air Jordan 1 with her name on it. It's wild, yeah.
It's also been fun to stay in touch with people, even on people that I've then become friends with through the show, who then talk to me about the impact the show has had on them for some of the people who we're giving an opportunity to that are on the younger side. I mean, I know that Liz Beecroft has been very, 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 just sort of thrilled with the traction she's gotten from her whole project. Period. But the show was, I don't think she expected to get the call to be on the show, and then when she did, it was a great opportunity for her, and also great for us to be able to present that type of a message to the community, because it's something that is not, prevalent in hypebeast culture to talk about, mental health and really get deep on that stuff. So that was a great one.
Yeah. Okay. So once we sort of decide who's going to be on, then it's time to book them, and that's your job, right, Christina? For the most part, is scheduling their calendar with my calendar.
Yes,
how
very
fun is
complicated
that?
calendar you have. I think a good example would be like the Maison Kitsune one. So like that one I think they emailed our editorial division, and then somebody thought it would be interesting for Business of Hype. So then I reached out back to them with Jeff's availability, and so they'll be like, oh, we're going to come to New York in a pop-up in 3 months. So I'm on like a 40-chain email with them trying to schedule their schedule with Jeff's schedule, because Jeff reschedules or they reschedule because people are super busy. And usually we'll try to work that out and try to find a date, and they'll record in Jeff's office. But it's usually like a 40 to 50 chain email of just going back and forth with different times. And like a lot of schedules always get rearranged for the most part.
Yeah. It's definitely harder than it looks to just schedule these people. I mean, they're very busy people.
Well, oftentimes you also forward me like another 30 or 40 chain email that you were already in conversation with, and I have to go through and read that chain and then add onto that an additional like 30, 40 chain to schedule a new interview.
Right.
Well, you should talk about where the show gets recorded, because it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah. And I think when we formed the show, the first big thing was like, Dan, how do I get a totally mobilized unit that fits into that tiny little tote bag that I have there? Because I didn't want to be relegated to only when people come to New York. It had to still sound relatively decent, but I could go anywhere in the world. And I'd say 10% of the shows are recorded in New York City. Like I remember when we first started, it was like season 3, literally like 30 episodes in before there was one recorded in New York. Whatever episode Shirt was the first New York City episode. Everything before that was Paris, Dubai, London, Tokyo, LA, Vegas.
And the only one I've ever been in the room for.
Yeah.
In all of the episodes. Shirt, shout out to Shirt, who was a part of 1212.
Yeah.
He was one of the hosts on 1212 with us.
Yeah. So yeah, the equipment and like being mobile is big. And I think just being portable is super key when you have a podcast. Like,
well, let's just demystify the gear thing super briefly.
Sure.
But, just for anyone who is interested in starting a podcast, if everybody in the world doesn't already have their own podcast.
My mobile setup. You want to go for it?
I'll just say that it's the simple old school H4n Zoom recorder.
Yep.
It's, and originally we weren't even running mics into it.
Yeah.
Jeff was balancing it on things in offices.
First it was on the table, and I realized it would just the whole table turned into a snare drum, basically. And so I soon realized I had to elevate it off the table. And so I would just find shoe boxes and like rolls of duct tape to just get it off the table. But you're right, we didn't have mics plugged into it in the beginning. And that was a huge improvement, plugging mics in, right?
Yeah. I'll spare everyone the stories of all the good times I had editing that first season and the incredible sound quality that we were achieving then.
Right. So what are we using? We're using Shure mics, that are not wireless. They're plugged straight in.
Sennheiser.
No, those are Shores, right?
Oh, we got
58s.
Sennheiser over
Yeah.
here.
Pretty standard
Shout out to Sennheiser. Shout out to Shore.
in every studio and on every stage and
Yeah.
like every venue ever.
Not expensive either. Like the Zoom is under 200. I think it's like 180. The Shores are like $20-$30 each. 2 cables. I also got Sony over the ear MDR 7506 headphones, which apparently suck. I didn't know that, but everyone here hates them. Apparently the sound quality is really subpar on these. I think they're fine. But they are, I think, one of the most comfortable headphones, which is key when you're talking to someone for an hour and a half. Let's see. We got those 2. There's a splitter sort of thing. Is that what you call that thing?
Sure, headphone splitter. Yeah.
Headphone splitter that allows you to plug in 2 headphones into the mic. SD card, obviously, to keep all the data on. And then I got 2 Shure
Tabletop mic stands.
Yeah, mic stands, correct. In case some people don't like holding the mic, they want to just put it on a table. And that's pretty much it. Christina has a higher end Zoom that allows for 4 mics to be plugged in. What's the model number on that?
It's the H6.
Yeah, so that's the equipment. I think that's pretty much it. I put it all in a Dispatch bag. Shout out Dispatch San Francisco. I paid full retail. No hookup from Dispatch. It's all good.
Welcome to my life.
But yeah, I am able to just carry the whole thing on anywhere I go and do a recording impromptu off the cuff. Next up, once we have the talent decided, it's booked. As Christina said, a location is determined of where we're recording. Obviously, if you're trying to make a podcast here, a quiet room is super duper important. Like no outside traffic. Ideally, no radio frequencies coming through like we're having now. No interruptions. Ideally, you're in a sound room that's padded and fully on lockdown, but you're never going to get that anywhere. So you have to try to recreate that with, whatever you can at your disposal. So like the obvious things, cell phones off, no tapping on the tables, like just normal shit.
And we've gone as far as in the beginning, I don't know if you remember this, I'm sure you do. We had 2 incredible instances. One where you were recording your narration in a car in a parking garage because you needed a quiet place, and you had to do that super late at night one night.
Yeah,
and that was a fun file to get.
Is the inside of a car a good place to record?
I'm going to say yes.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. It was definitely better than the time we were on deadline and you recorded in an airport while
at a lounge. I remember I was at I think it was in Hong Kong. I was at the Cathay Lounge, and like every 3 minutes it'd be like, now boarding flight 767. Like,
and there was a point on that file in which you definitely got pissed off, and
because I'm trying to get the interlude in before the flight announcement, and I'm just like, fuck! I just go nuts.
Yeah, and I think the rest of the funny part about that story was that you sent it to me, and I had just landed in LAX and needed to like use my hotspot to download the file, to plop it into the session, to email it out for it to like deliver and go live in like 2 hours or something. But it was like the early challenges of us just doing whatever we had to do to like get it out and try and find places to do it and make it work.
It's true. Surprisingly, now when I'm in a pinch, I will record at home in my closet, which happens to be, I think because of all the clothes and stuff in there, it's like good sound insulation. DRB, do you like it? Like,
yeah, that works.
It sounds good, right?
Yeah.
All right, then, so there's the equipment. Next up is prep. A lot of people ask me how I prepare for interviews. I usually prepare for interviews on my way to the interview. So like if I'm in the Uber 20 minutes prior, or as I'm walking, as I'm waiting for them in their lobby, that's when I'll prepare. I've done a couple of episodes where I really tried to be like scripted, and I had notes printed and I had bullet points that I wanted to hit, but I suck at being scripted. I'm much better at being off the cuff and freestyled.
Like every great student, prepare on the way to the test.
Exactly. Yeah, procrastinate to the fullest. Now that just works for me. I don't think that works for everyone necessarily, but I'm, more so. And sometimes, I will, like, if there's someone that I don't know a lot about, I will do some research on them, look at some websites, see a couple of past interviews. One thing that I don't like doing is doing an interview with someone that like is an exact replica of like an interview they just did. That's sort of, I get interviewed sometimes, so like that's annoying for me. It shows that they didn't do any research. So I'll try to do things that don't get repetitive for them. But I think, one of the things that just makes the show interesting is I try to imbue my experience in the industry as well in each episode. So it just becomes a conversation amongst peers versus like a journalism interview. All right, so the episode's recorded, it's interviewed. I then shoot it off to DRB in Portland, Maine via WeTransfer. Shout out Nalden at WeTransfer for inventing that beautiful thing.
Love WeTransfer.
Yes.
Totally destroys all the drop boxes and all the other, like, seriously,
We're trying to get Dropbox as a sponsor.
Oh, well, try for WeTransfer.
All right. So DRB, what happens after you get it at usually 2:30 in the morning or something?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few steps for setting up. I mean, if I have to do the whole thing in one sitting, it's really kind of too long and gets to be a little mind-bending and hard to focus by the end of it, So I try to split it up and do a little prep work and get everything set up. And I use Pro Tools, which is kind of somewhat old-fashioned these days, but it's a DAW, DAW, digital audio workstation, and get everything, just get all the files in there and try to organize it and do a little noise preparation, try to get people's sticky mouths and their dry lips and stuff, get that eliminated.
Really? You could do that?
Yeah, to varying degrees of success, but yeah,
Impressive.
there are some
lip balm filter.
Lip balm filter, right? Cotton mouth filter.
Yeah, it's been a lot better lately, actually. But
We hydrate our guests now.
yeah. But some stuff like that, and then it's mostly the labor of like just going through it. And I realized pretty much early on that like there are no shortcuts. I'm listening to every second of everything that gets sent to me. You know what I mean?
Right. You don't listen to it at like double speed?
Nope.
It's time consuming.
Yeah. It is that. And then that's the main thing. Is just
Let's talk about hacking. So like, how much are you cutting out in a typical episode?
not a ton necessarily. It wouldn't even necessarily be like even minutes shorter unless there's stuff that's like really obvious, or if people say things and like these days, now that you've been doing this for a while, there'll be retractions within the interview. And that makes it easy, you know, that there's no back and forth email to like get something approved. They just say, oh, cut that. And I cut it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. In like live.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like when I'm doing it the first time around.
It's interesting because in the beginning, when no one knew what the business of hype was yet, right, and it didn't have like any sort of reputation, people were really relaxed. But if you noticed in recent episodes, people bring their own scripts and notes and stuff, and they're like, I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus, but they're like, wait, I said that wrong. And then you'll hear papers ruffling and stuff, and then they'll like reread it. And I'm in the interview watching them like, wow, you brought like a script for yourself about your own life? That's so random that I was like, why don't you just
do you ever
freely?
tell
But
them,
I think
like, chill out? Like,
no.
we don't need that.
I sort of like help them along. I'm like, you got it all now? You good? Like,
You want to do a couple
interestingly,
takes?
I think some podcasts are way more like that, actually. Like where I don't do a ton of freelance podcast work, but sometimes I'm recording people and the interviewer will be like, can we get that again? You know, like straight up, like getting coverage kind of.
I should try that. I don't think I've ever said that to anybody.
Ask the question again. Or,
To get it, like, so as he's working out the answer, like, just get it once good. I should try that.
I mean, I think your thing is a little bit more natural, actually. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, so you've cleaned out sticky lips, cotton mouth, hisses, ums. You've got a first edit, And then what do you do?
And then I upload it back to WeTransfer, get it back to you guys as soon as possible.
And then it goes to Mr.
to me.
Pacampara.
Yeah. So it goes, I get it. DRB, you send it out to the full thread, and I essentially see it, download it, and I'll do a couple passes of that edit.
Do you do it in one listen, or do you break it up like DRB does?
So I'll do it one listen, just because I want to listen to it as just a regular listener, as someone who would do it not working on it. How would they experience this episode by itself? Listen to it all the way through. And then as I'm listening, I'll just make note of, okay, what are the different potential segments of it? I
want to know how you make notes.
So I'll
because you're listening to a thing, you can't mark something.
Exactly. So I'll basically, when I'm listening, and I've listened at multiple times, whether it be like downloading it and it's essentially my podcast for the morning, and I'll use it for the ride up on the train, or I'll proactively go to a coffee shop, sit down with my laptop, download it. Essentially, there's about 5 or 6 different interludes per episode. I have a template of how I'm writing these things out. There's a start date of when a interlude would start.
A start time, you mean?
A start time, sorry, yeah. Start time when an interlude would start. And then I'll just log everything being said. So essentially, timestamps of topics or timestamps of interesting things as I'm listening to it. So that's kind of the note was what I'm making. Listen to it all the way through. It can be from 0 to 1 minute introduction, 1 minute to 2:53, talking about their day. And then 3, 5 to 6 minutes, then it's like, oh, this is about their schooling. And then, so by kind of the minute, I'll break it down as I'm listening to it. Once I have more so just a structure or outline of how the actual interview is going, I'll probably shut down for the day. Next day, I'll listen to it again and go and just reference those notes of like, okay, well, this is actually what the outline of the episode is. What are the actual pieces that make sense? How can I actually break this out? So I'll listen to it again with those notes in mind, and then pull out what are those trends? What makes sense for a break? And then once I get a good idea of typically what those 5 or 6 interludes are, then that's where like the choppy listen will go into. I'll listen to it for about 15 minutes. Then I'll, bring up my browser and just read about more things.
Do some research.
What is this context that they're talking about? You might have a reference of something, just like one-off sentence, or the person you're interviewing may have just like a quick reference and like, oh wait, what are they actually talking about? So maybe that's something you can expound on.
That's dope.
Yeah. So
it's very process driven.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it is right now. When it was in the very beginning, it was really just like, all right, let me just...
off the cuff.
Just off the cuff.
Yeah.
And it was, I'd be writing on the train, just like on my phone, on the notes app, and just, all right, at 23:35, they were talking about these shoes. Okay, let's connect it to something.
Right.
And then I forget, I'm like, oh wait, but they were also talking about something else. So I didn't actually have an outline. So it was more of a hassle, just like going back and forth. I would probably listen to this episode like 10 times, and unedited, it's like an hour. But the one I actually set up an outline of it, then I'll probably listen to it like 3 times just to check myself and make sure I'm pulling out the right things and talking about the right things.
So are you using like the Notes app on your phone, like while on the subway all the time?
All the time. All the time.
That's awesome. And we recently made a tweak after season 5.
Yeah.
Where what I was finding was that, like, because again, we're doing this all remotely. We don't ever meet up and do these things, right? So you're sending me timestamps of where you would like interludes to be, and you're writing cues in terms of scripting. But what I'm not getting from you is the tonality of what it is that you want me to speak on.
It's true, yeah.
You could send me a paragraph, and I could read it like plain Jane, like a newscaster. I could read it like a teacher. I could read it like a old grandpa. I could read it like a young buck. Like there's many ways that I could like really interpret the same paragraph. So at the end of season 5 and into season 6, you started adding tonality notes into like I want you to be amped when you say this, or I want you to be like academic when you say this. I want you to be like remorseful when you say this. It's really cool to like, I think that little subtle ad has, enhanced the podcast even more.
Yeah, because it's like when you go through it, it's, I try to just imagine, what's your natural reaction to when someone's telling that story. And they can be telling a story of the history of how they got up into this point, and then maybe there's this turning moment within that experience of like an oh shit moment, and that's a moment where you can basically be like, oh well, like kind of wowed in that moment, or it's a very serious moment where, okay, this is a serious takeaway that you guys need to listen to. So make sure you hammer that in.
Yeah. And the beauty of the show is that it runs the gamut from like almost tearful, emotional, deep moments to like super amped up, this is life-changing stuff.
Yeah,
like,
we're not talking about just like cool drops that someone made. No, we're talking about like the process of how they got that. And also the story of how they even got to the moment to even create a drop,
Right. I gotta ask you this. When you're writing in your notes, is my voice in your head?
So then, constantly. And I'm just like, cause I'll talk in a certain way. I'll say something in a certain way, and then I'll read it out loud. I'm like, and that's always how, when you're writing in this way, it's like, okay, well, I'm not writing for my specific voice. It's like, would Jeff actually say it this way?
Right.
Even down to the word, like, would Jeff actually use this word? Or would Jeff, when Jeff is like wowed with something, like how would you actually?
Yeah. What expletive would he use? For
yeah,
that?
exactly.
But wait, I got a follow-up question now. After the episode's out and live, do you listen to the interlude to see how closely I did it to your script, or you never do that? I wonder if you do that.
I sometimes.
You'll look back on your notes and compare it to what I said?
Yeah, but not like, I won't do it. I don't schedule my time to be like, all right, time to sit down and listen
It
to
happens
this.
organically. It
happens
happens
organically.
Yeah.
A point of it is like, I've already listened to this episode maybe like 5 times.
Probably the most.
And I'm like,
you can't.
I got nothing to take away at this point, you know?
Because sometimes I'll do a full rewrite on one of your interludes, and I feel bad. I'm like, I hope Sid doesn't listen to this and feel insulted that I totally rewrote his interlude.
Yeah, no, and the main thing is just like, I am writing, like as you, so I'm coming in with the expectation of like, if I'm not coming up with the right interlude for this moment or for this section or just for the episode, then by all means, please change it.
Right. And DRB, you must hear sometimes where I'm just like, yeah, I don't need this interlude here. That
We're making
this one.
Yeah.
It's funny the conversations that I have with DRB in a one-way, non-responsive format.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this meeting and anticipating it because it's like I feel like I really know you,
right?
But it's a one-way thing, and that feels really weird too.
Yeah. There's not going to be many people in your life where you talk to someone while you're in a closet and they're not responding to you. That doesn't happen.
But they'll hear it.
But
like
they're going to hear
point.
everything.
Yeah.
That's a very unique relationship that we have.
Yeah.
All right. So you get the interludes back to me and Dan.
Yeah. So it's basically in
the form of a Word doc.
Usually. A Word doc and embedded in the email and just sends it straight through.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then Dan and I either schedule a time to record it at his studio, or I do it at home in my closet, amongst a lot of VisVim and acronym.
Flex. Yo.
Low key.
Chill out. Yo.
VisVim insulates better.
I got you.
Yeah. That's why I bought.
Japanese.
I'm trying to step up to Capital Denim and like get that insulation.
Yeah.
So I lay my tracks down on my own, the recording device that we just mentioned, and then I immediately get it over back to DRB, so the baton gets passed back to you now. And then so now what do you do?
So then at that point, I have the interview, which I originally cut. That hasn't changed at all. And then I have your voiceovers. I drop that into the session at the end of it and go through an editing process with that, which actually usually does involve a lot more cuts because sometimes there's 2 or 3 takes on a paragraph or interlude or whatever. And then I've got a library of music beds that I got from Daniel. and it didn't take me that long to figure out that I have to work backwards, because if I don't work backwards on the timeline, then nothing syncs up.
What?
Does that make sense?
No, you work backwards from the end of the episode to the front?
Yes, when it comes to inserting the interludes.
Yeah,
Why does that have to happen?
Because the time stamps that Sid gives
Gotcha.
will be thrown
change
off if you
constantly.
start from the beginning and work towards the end.
So you work backwards from my last interlude, and
Well,
that doesn't
right.
throw off the time. Oh yeah, it doesn't throw off the
Yeah.
time. Wow.
Right. So that's where it's like just another organizational thing where I cut up your interludes first and label everything, and then I drop them in backwards, and then
All in Pro Tools.
Yep, all in Pro Tools. Yep, and then using the music library as the background beds under the interludes is, that's where I get to have some creative license sometimes.
Yep. And we went through a lot of fine tuning on how that fades in, out.
Yep. Get
The
pacing
duration
right
of the
and-
fade. Yeah, the
Yep.
pacing. It's key. When it's off, people don't know why it's off or how it's off. They just know this shit sounds bad.
Right.
And so like the number of times that DRB, myself, and Dan went through like, it's not right. I can't explain why it's not right. Just give it another go. You know?
I was in the mix with you guys for a while before we committed to doing even the 2-tiered editing process. At first, it was just I would get the interview and the voiceovers at the same time,
Oh, right. Oh.
and it took a while. And I think that it really elevated the whole thing, because then I listened again all the way through, and it's another opportunity to further refine it, or I'm more familiar with the subject at that point, so maybe I know that, oh yeah, they say this again, so when they repeat themselves, I can actually cut it the next time, just
yeah.
that kind of stuff. You
Right.
know?
The
I think there
process
was
is.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say the process has changed numerous times, and before it was Christina, Sid, David. It was I was trying to solve all of those
of them,
problems,
yeah.
and it was just us, And
Yep.
but I think the great thing is that we're open to continuing to adapt it, and we have ideas for what to do with it.
Yep.
Moving forward as well. But
Yep.
we've learned a lot.
I constantly want to evolve it, but I'm also very cognizant that there's a familiarity with this that like people love. And I always go back to like, I'm going to date the fuck out of myself, but like I go back to the TV show Cheers that I used to watch a lot. And like there's something about Thursday at 8 p.m. when like that theme song comes on, and there's like a nice feeling to that I've always tried to achieve with Business of Hype while progressing it, but not leaving people in the dust like, okay, we're changing the whole recipe now,
Yeah, the consistency.
Yeah.
Norm always needs to be seated.
Yeah.
At the end of the bar.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't think the changes. I mean, the changes may have been major, but it's more so on the back end of how do you refine the process,
Yeah.
which is that turns into a better sounding
Yep.
episode or better sounding season, and I think
People notice, like they come to me after the season, we do a new season. They're like, yo, the improvements you made are huge. And
Yeah.
we think it's like, we're just tweaking, but
Yeah.
like, they're like, wow, it's like you scrubbed my eyes. Like it's like all crystal clear now. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, anything to make the experience better.
Yeah. All right. So audio's done for the most part, right? When you're,
Yeah. At that point, I mean, the last step is dropping in the background music is sort of and one final pass of the whole thing. And then if I'm have any reason to think that it might not be perfect, then I'll just check the interludes typically and check for those pacing moments and stuff, and like get a little pre-roll before the interlude drops in, and just make sure everything feels
Right.
like it should.
and then you send it off to the
Back
crew, and Christina gets it now. But in the background, while this is all happening, Christina, there's a whole, even though this podcast is audio only, there is a lot of visual element that comes with this. So talk about what you're doing on the backside, trying to make this visually compelling.
So, usually I'll get the MP3, and then I will do a minute by minute breakdown similar to probably what Sydney's doing. And then I will pick like 3 or 4 pull quotes. I send them over to you, Jeff, and then you approve and pick one of them. And then from there, I make the social assets.
Let's break down what pull quotes are first. So
Oh.
when you hear a Business of
Really?
Hype, being, not by definition, but what we mean is when you hear a Business of Hype being previewed and teased on Instagram, that 60-second usually, long
Yeah.
Instagram quote, think about, I think everyone who's listening to this just takes that for granted that like, oh, they just picked a quote. But like,
No,
no.
it takes so much time to try to find a good quote from people because I have to think about like the conversation that they're having with you, Jeff, and like sometimes I have to cut out like laughter or like inappropriate words or like things like that. And I think that for me takes the longest. Making the social assets are really easy. Like before, I think they had like a template for it, but then I revised it where I have to like,
Yeah. So you're listening to the whole thing. You narrow down to the top 3 to 5 pull quotes.
Yeah.
You run them by me.
yeah,
I pick the favorite one.
yeah. And
And
sometimes
recently I've been letting you pick the favorite one.
yes.
He's
Well,
so
usually,
You're like, yes.
yeah. I mean, usually I do have one in mind, and it's almost always the one that you pick
Oh, so you're manipulating my mind.
a little bit.
Jedi.
And a lot of
Jedi.
times the quotes are over 1 minute, and so I have to cut them to be under 60 seconds for
Right.
Instagram.
Yep.
And this is like important because it also goes up on HYPEBEAST Maine Instagram, which has a huge following. So we want to make sure that the social assets are correct and
Yep.
that they don't have typos, which they've had before.
Yeah, yeah.
And things like that.
Yep.
But
So you also have to transcribe them as well.
yeah, so I get the pull quote and then I cut it and then I make the social assets. And I try to get image permission from the guest and I try to put in all the imagery into the video to kind of showcase like the guest's portfolio work, I guess. And then from there, I also am the one that is the connection to Anchor aside from you, Jeff. And so
Yeah.
I go
So
on
let's talk about Anchor.
Okay.
Anchor.fm
Yeah.
is how this podcast, I don't even know how to, like, I'm so not tech savvy on this, but basically, if you record a podcast in your bedroom, the only way it ends up on Apple Music or Apple Podcasts and Spotify and BeanPod and Stitcher and all the other ones is, I don't even know the other way of doing it.
Are you saying they're a hub of like distribution?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
They're
guess so.
hosting it and then distributing it to all of the different various
Yeah.
Stitchers and all of that
Yep.
stuff.
But shout out to Anchor. I don't even know how this would fucking happen.
Thanks, Anna.
If it didn't have, like, you would just have to do these individually. Like, you'd have to reach out to each one and do it.
Well, before my time, I think they were using something else and I'm not sure what it was. Maybe Libsyn.
Yeah, there
Is that what
are
it was
other
called?
ones
Yeah.
that you can use where you upload your podcast and then it's telling you which resources
It's
it's
super
sending it to.
complicated. It involves like RSS feeds and all this, like some light coding and shit. Anchor FM, shout out to them. This is not a paid sponsor, but like they really made it so that it's like the equivalent of uploading like a YouTube video, So they're great. So you're the main contact to people at Anchor. I should have had an Anchor person here too, but anyway.
Yeah, well, I kind of bother them a lot, but yeah, so I get the MP3 and then I upload it onto Anchor and that will distribute it on Sundays at 11 to all the other platforms like Spotify, Apple, Anchor FM, which is its own, Stitcher, Overcast.
I didn't even know it
everything.
was 11.
Sundays at 11?
Yeah.
I schedule them for Sundays at 11.
I
You
thought
didn't
they
know-
go up at noon.
No. What?
Okay. I felt like it was noon.
Maybe I should do noon so I could
There's get
Wake
an
up
extra hour
later.
of sleep. No, for sure. Wait, does it take an hour for them to go up or it's instant?
Apple Podcast will go up right away if you're subscribed. So you should subscribe.
Okay.
Yeah.
You should
But-
do noon. Get that extra hour sleep. I've
I'm
mandated
already
it.
up. I'm already up earlier. But the way that people don't understand is that like in order for, because I also do the editorial write-ups on hypebeast.com,
Okay.
which is, I think, gains a lot of traction to the podcast because it's featured and it's stickied up on our site for a whole day.
For sure.
And so I do the write-ups for that and I do the social assets and I also go on Anchor and I make sure, and I do all the written descriptions for Anchor. So when you're on Spotify or Apple and you're reading the description, I'm the one that's writing that. So if you ever find a mistake, let me know and I will fix it.
Right.
Things
Wow,
like
so
that.
you're writing the .com post, the description.
Jeff doesn't know this.
There's a lot he doesn't know.
Yes.
I thought Eddie Ng did everything.
No. Well, For my editorial posts, I actually send them to Bob, and he's the final look at them. I don't know if you knew that either.
No, so Bob Marshall.
Shout out to Robert Marshall,
Robert
who is
Marshall.
the final
The third, I believe,
eyes.
right?
But Eddie Ang also looks at them as well.
Okay, so do they really review before they post, or do you have the power to post?
Yeah, so I write it up, and then the senior editor will usually overlook and make sure I don't have any mistakes on anything. And then it goes up. It's scheduled to go up on Sunday at 11, but I need the MP3, and I don't get the MP3 unless it's like already out. So I have to be on my computer on Sundays at 11 to get the MP3 to put it into the backend on hypebeast.com. And then when it's up,
Is everyone else feeling the guilt?
I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, I don't mind it. I'm like used to it. But
Right.
But she can't brunch until after that's done.
Yeah, she could brunch at noon.
yeah, so there's no other way
not
that I
noon
can
anymore.
get the MP3. I've asked. So Anchor, if you have an option for that in the future, that would be great.
And how about social? So, like, do you have the power to, or authority, power? Do you have the authority to, like, Instagram and tweet, like, on the Hypebeast radio channels?
Yes, that is on my phone. So I also social that as well. And then
Wow.
I do all the retweets from Hypebeast.
You got a lot going on, girl.
But then Hypebeast main IG, I don't do that. Like I
Right.
have to send that over to the social team, and I work with, they like schedule it whenever later in the week. Yeah.
Okay. And then we're live. Did you just hear that shit was like...
Just like that.
Yeah. So I hope you all appreciate when you hear an episode now. The other thing is that I want to add in the process is that I always do all interviews in person. There has never been a phoned in episode yet. And many people want to do phone ins, but I'm just an old head ass that just feels like when you look someone in the eye, you get different vibes than when you do a call in. So haven't done a phone in yet. I think if I did open it up one day to figure out like how to do it, whether it's FaceTime or Skype or whatever, maybe. But I even feel like even seeing them through a screen, like seeing their face through a screen is not the same as being in the room with them. There's like, people give off energies and shit that like I want to be receptive to. And then the other big question that everyone in the world asks of us, including Hypebeast management, is video. And everyone wants the business of hype to be video broadcasted as well. And that's another sort of moral thing that I feel in the similar vein as to why I record everything in person. I deliberately only do audio. And, not to mention, they're on YouTube. It's a static image on YouTube that you can listen to the podcast, right, Christina? Do you do those too?
Do what?
You put them on YouTube also?
Oh, I also put them on YouTube.
Wow.
And SoundCloud.
Wow. Okay. So you put them on YouTube and with the static image as well.
Yeah, they take forever to export, by the way. But before we used Anchor, I think we were really heavy users of SoundCloud as well, which is
Yeah.
why a lot of our listens were from SoundCloud.
yeah.
And it was confusing because before we had all our podcasts on one podcast,
right.
and then we split them up.
Yep.
Yeah, which is important.
So anyway, yeah, we have them on YouTube. You could listen to them on YouTube, but you can't see the actual interview happening. And I really feel like when you listen to something in your headphones and you're not watching it with your eyes and listening, I really feel like, and I'm no neuroscientist, but I feel like it triggers a different part of your brain. Like I feel it personally when I'm watching something on my phone or on my laptop versus only when I'm listening. I feel like literally a different part of my brain is firing. And I don't know if there's any truth behind that, but I feel like you get a higher level of learning. It's kind of like reading. And when you're reading something, you have to like imagine shit. I feel like podcast listening is similar.
Yeah, I think you're focusing on, I don't know if this is the correct way to phrase it, but it's one dimension, and if you are also watching it as well, then your brain is processing the information, the visual information as well. And then just beyond that, I think what works about the show is that nobody really feels self-conscious. And I think if we introduced video into that, it would probably create a little bit more of a self-conscious
Absolutely right.
environment. And
Right.
I don't think that would benefit the quality of the message.
Really
from the
good point. I
individual.
didn't even think about that, but you're right. If there's GoPros and things all in
Yeah.
their face, it changes the way they answer questions.
Yeah, and film guys, trust me, we're the worst. No one
Yeah.
wants us around when you're trying to like
I
get
know.
serious. We think the image is so important. It's not that important.
Yeah. So, in lieu of getting the views and the downloads, and I understand the power of YouTube, but like we're gonna stick to our guns for now. At least my show.
I'm all for it. It sounds like we have more than enough to do just with the audio side of it.
I know. It's like, can you imagine if we added that?
Christina, if you have free time for that, right?
No.
All right. So I want to go into some anecdotes. I know we've been going for a while now, but what the fuck? Whatever.
If you've made it this far.
I know. So, I'm sure each of you have had your own sort of moment that is personal to you in the making of the show. So I just wanted to, open the mic up and like let you guys speak on that. Any takers who wants to go first on like an anecdote? And let's keep it for this one on like the production and the making of the show, not yet like insights. We'll do insights afterwards. Anybody?
I think mine would be the ones that I just sort of touched on before, the absolutely sort of insane scenarios we had gotten ourselves into in the early stages of recording in odd places and, trying to make these deadlines and, challenging each other on notes and trying to improve the show when it needed to go live in an hour.
Yeah.
Which happened quite a bit in the beginning.
And not only that, but almost all of the sessions that we did were on like Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah.
Right? It was almost always weekends.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can say early on that I didn't really want to articulate too clearly to you guys that I hadn't done a podcast before. So it was really like, I've had to figure out immediately, like nobody's going to hold my hand and I wasn't going to, and the content is like too long to be like, oh, how should this be or how should that be? It was just really like jump in and get it done and have the confidence that, you guys are putting your faith in me to give you what you want and make it good and just roll with it.
Yeah, what's fun about stuff like this is that it's too much. We found that the show was fun to make and we wanted to keep doing it, but the bandwidth for the two of us, Jeff and I, was just, as you hear what everyone else's roles in the show are, that was falling on the two of us, And I think
it's impossible.
It was just so, it's been fun. I think both of us, Jeff and I, are big believers in you find people with enthusiasm and you trust them to do the work and let them be great. And this whole team has just become, really great at doing their roles. So it's not like a real hand-holding micromanagement situation. It's sort of like, let's all stay inspired and, encourage each other to do it, to the best of our ability. And I think that's been the strategy. That's been the main note.
Yeah. All right. How about insights that sort of stick with you after 70 some odd episodes now?
I'm most inspired by the people you talk to who come from humble beginnings and didn't have seed money from their parents or whatever. I mean, those stories are great sometimes too, but I think it was Samuel Ross from Cold Wall and even John Jay talked about having pretty like modest up.
Slept in actually he lived in the laundromat.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that story's crazy. But the one that sticks with me that I actually can't even get out of my head is James Whitner.
Who got shot.
Yeah, but he said this line, and I could tell it was a line that he'd used before, but it was like so vivid to me. He's like, the 18-year-old version of myself is trying to kill the 40-year-old version of myself, and it's my job to kill them first. And I was just like, it just blew my mind.
Damn.
It was like really
right there.
just like,
What'd you say?
That's a bar right
I
there.
know. Wow.
yeah. And his whole story was super interesting to me, and just what he's been able to do with little to nothing to start with.
I know.
Super inspiring.
Yeah.
Sid, do you want to
Yeah, I
go?
think, like I said before, I came in as a fan, and as we were going through a lot of these episodes, it was, these people I've either knew of, had an idea, or was just diehard fan of their brand, or just really, really followed them, or just really respected their work. so it was great to just hear firsthand the breakdown of all of this and being part of it of, okay, well, what does this actually relate? How does this relate to me? And how does this relate to someone who is like me? Or even how does this relate to someone who is a listener who isn't in the same space as I am? Because we have such a diverse group of listeners. And knowing that what they're saying can spark something, after they listen to it. And just hearing those stories also of, okay, well, I listened to this episode, and wow, I didn't even think about, starting a brand or starting something, or even just a perspective change, or I'd even look into doing my project this way. But now that I've, listened to the episode, I'll consider it that way.
Yeah.
So
any stand out to you? Like any specific ones? Guess.
Like A-Life was a big one, just because of how kind of monumental they were. They are, and they have been. And just knowing and hearing about that ups and downs through their company. I think John's a big one, just because I'm coming also from an advertising side. Originally before this,
and you were at Uniqlo as well.
Yeah, Uniqlo as well. So it's like it's hitting home in so many different ways. But then also, he has so many different chapters.
And we're talking about John Jay.
John Jay, correct? Yeah, John Jay, and he has so many chapters within his life where it's like. Anyone would take.
We could have done 3 episodes, separate episodes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But anyone would take just one chapter, and be cool with it. But there's so much to learn from that. And then knowing how that kind of resonates with me, and then talking to other people where how they feel about that same exact episode.
Oh yeah.
Then it's just like, I didn't even think about that part. Like I kind of just brushed over that part because I already knew about White and everything.
Right.
But that was some people's first real inside look into White and Kennedy.
I didn't even think about that level where people share their distinct insights from the same episode.
Yeah,
that's crazy. Christina, how about you? I always like when we're on a Slack channel and she'll be sending me comments and stuff or which poll quote to use. And I'll just get a line from Christina. This was a good one. Thank you. It comes once every 8 weeks. I get the Christina stamp of approval.
Oh, I think
You
the
should put
recent
that as
one.
a star on the side of the post.
Did I do that for the Tremaine Emery episode? I think it might have been that one.
Tremaine.
Yeah, that was a good one.
The Denim Tears one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, they're all great.
Right.
I definitely think some episodes stand out more so than others, and I think it's usually what DRB said when the guest comes from a place of knowing what it's like to not have anything, and I think it just has a really different perspective. I would say being 70 episodes in, I mean, I wasn't here for the beginning of it, but it's really interesting because a lot of the guests, they're really well-known people, some of them, and they've been interviewed obviously by other media outlets and whatnot. You can have the same guests on a number of different podcasts, also How I Built This, or on Terry Gross's Fresh Air or something. But then every interview that you have will always be different depending on the host. And I think it's really interesting because you provide such a different aspect because you are such a big person in the streetwear world. So I think it's really interesting to have an OG street person with new talent or old talent, and it's a really different type of A$AP Ferg, for example. People that are interviewing him are people that are on The Breakfast Club, or people that are in music, but you're a really different person to interview him because you're coming from a streetwear side and a business perspective. So it's really interesting to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would actually just briefly say that the Tremaine episode was one of the ones that hit the hardest for me. He's another guy from Queens, where I'm from, and we grew up very close to one another and same time. And we actually met through a job I was directing where he was featured for GQ and Gap, and we just got along on the Queens thing, and eventually, we talked about having him on the show, and he was open to doing it. But he said something that I'll never forget, where he mentioned in talking about losing his mom, where he said, when you've carried your mother's casket, everything else is light. And I've been there with a bunch of other friends before, and I think it just helped me keep a fresh perspective on my career in advertising and as a filmmaker, that no matter how hard stuff gets sometimes, you have to keep a perspective at all times. So that was definitely one of my favorite episodes for sure.
Word. For me, it's always like the little, because I'm doing them live and in person. It's always like, and I also think because I have a highly photographic memory versus anything else. So I remember visual snapshots of like what I'm seeing while I'm doing it. So it's like the first episode ever is with, my mentor, Hiroshi Fujiwara, and it was in Dubai in like a hotel conference room. And I remember having to like coerce the front desk lady to give us a conference room for free in order to do the recording. Doing it in Sarah's, home office studio in Paris at the top of the Colette building, just as she announced closing Colette. Interviewing Aaron the week that he announced his retirement from ComplexCon, the thing he founded, and then starting the network, which was his next company. I also remember, you probably remember this. Oh, I don't know if you were editing yet, but when I did Upscale Vandal, it took him like 15 minutes to take all his jewelry off. Like it was like just chain after watch after ring. It was like Fort Knox on the table.
Another Queens guy.
Yeah.
Shout out to Queens.
Yeah.
Shout out Queens.
Melody Asani one, which we spoke about, was the only malfunction that I've ever encountered, knock on wood somewhere. Because that was the one where like 20 minutes into the interview, I realized the clock wasn't ticking, which is the worst fucking feeling you could possibly have. Because now you have to ask this person that you're interviewing to re-engage from the beginning and act like nothing ever happened, which is horrible.
I think that was episode 4 or something.
Yeah, I was a rookie. Yoon on from Ambush. I remember it was during Paris Fashion Week. I met her at her showroom. And I remember just her walking in with a box of chocolates to give to all her staff. And she just like sort of did this lap where she walked in, handed the chocolates out, and addressed all of the of her staff and did a lap and then walked out with me to go to the place that we were going to record. And each person she spoke to was like a directive of what they needed to do. And it was like the most boss shit I'd ever seen. Like it was literally like, did you get those photocopies? Did you make that appointment? Cancel that one. When you go around, tuck that in. Make sure that seam is stitched. Did you steam the clothes? Samples, photo shoots, good. Okay, good. Let's go, Jeff. And it was like, I was just like, oh my god,
That's how you do it. That's dope.
It was so G. It was incredible. What else happened? Let's see. Oh, Ben Baller in Cali, right? Like I wanted to interview near his house, so it was convenient. He lives out in the burbs of Cali. And I was trying to look for like a dope hotel for us because it's Ben Baller. I felt like I needed to find a Ritz-Carlton or some shit. The only hotel near his house was the Hampton Inn and Suites, right? That we could record in.
Very Ben Baller.
Yeah, it's very Ben. So I tell him the address and he pulls up in like his Ferrari FF like convertible shit. And all the managers of Hampton are like, what the fuck is going down here? They thought like a drug deal was going down. That was hilarious. I remember I got a last minute interview while I was in Portland with John Wexler of Adidas. Mm-hmm. But I didn't bring any Adidas with me to wear to the Adidas headquarters. So
You went in
I only brought
barefoot.
Nikes. And it was the same day. And so I didn't have time to like...
Go cop anything or...
cop anything. So I had to borrow a friend of mine's Visvims. So if you see a photo... And Visvim is like a brand that like maybe you could just wear into the Adidas headquarters. But the Visvims were so old that by the end of the interview, I like the outsole ripped off of the upper on the Visvim while interviewing Wexler.
So you messed up someone's pair.
Yeah, exactly. They were like a 9.5, so I just like I'm a 10, so I just ripped through them. I remember going into Jerry Lorenzo's office at Fear of God, and like in his office, it's sort of like Japanese style, where like you take your shoes off and you put like these slippers on to walk around. But then when you go to the bathroom, just like in Japan, it's customary that like the bathrooms in Japan have a bathroom dedicated slipper because it just should stay in the bathroom. That's the bathroom slipper. But when I went to use his bathroom at Fear of God, the bathroom shoes were like Sakai's, Fear of Gods. Like it was like Travis Scott Jordan 1 sample that's never released. Just like the illest shit was like the ones that you pee on, basically. And I was like, this dude is fucking on. Like I have a picture of it.
On him.
Yeah. He just had like 3 Sakai's just sitting there. Like these are the ones you piss on. Doing Roy Choi as he just opened his first restaurant in Vegas, like doing it in the kitchen was really dope. JC Lopez of Urban Necessities. And that was a real great one because it came about when the whole American Eagle partnering with Urban Necessities happened, and then I did a commentary on my social media about it. It blew up, went viral. People thought I was attacking JC, who was the founder of Urban Necessities, and literally through the comments is when and where we connected to do the podcast, and the Business of Hype became like the olive branch to air out our mutual frustrations of what we had gone through. And now we're like really good friends. So we turned like what could have been beef into peace through the Business of Hype, all within like 3 weeks of the entire thing happening.
That's actually a dope moment because when that happened, there was a lot of, that was a conversation through a lot of people. And I remember I was talking about it with different people bring it up to me, and I'm like, just wait, just hold up just a second.
Right.
Like, hold your opinion. There's going to be
a resolution.
Yeah.
But you didn't want to say too much.
Yeah, I didn't want to go too much into it, but I'm like, you'll hear it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a good, like, in the moment
Yep.
episode.
And American Eagle even had like legal sitting in on our interview.
Oh, yeah.
Just to make sure that we didn't like brawl or something. Like, I don't know, but they were just like, we're just going to sit here just in case. And we're like, okay. So yeah, a lot of amazing moments. We recently just did Kim Jones and Alexander Arnault from Ramova, and that was arranged while I was in Mexico City for a conference, and then found out that Kim Jones needed us to interview him in Paris. So while I thought I was going home, I instead hopped on a plane and went from Mexico City to Paris to do the interview for 48 hours and went back to New York. It's crazy, yeah, whatever it takes, you know? But yeah, a lot of amazing memories and stories came out of these seasons. So looking into the future, what do we got going into the future? Just a couple of things that, I might want to touch on. We're always trying to make it better, sound better, feel better, whatever that means. So we're going to constantly do that. I want to tease that we are in the midst of planning a book, a Business of Hype coffee table book. And it's so funny because in this age of like TikTok and IG Live and all this shit, like here we are doing an audio only, no video podcast and then making a book. Like I feel like we're going backwards in the evolutionary tech cycle. Like the next one will be like, we're going to do smoke signals as our and Morse code.
We're showing our age.
I think we are, but I think we're also trying to tell people that like there's more impactful ways of consuming your messages.
Yeah.
And there's what you trade in convenience, you're getting something robbed of like the substance of what you're getting,
Yeah.
It's the lasting message also, one that you can refer to each and every day.
Yep. And the other huge news that just happened last week is Business of Hype inked a deal with JetBlue Airways.
Hey.
Yeah, where now whenever you're flying in the friendly skies, 35,000 feet, you got nothing to do, you can listen to the Business of Hype on all JetBlue airlines, which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
Taking it to the skies, baby.
You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. I personally use Anchor FM. Also, leave a comment on Apple and tell us what you think of the show. It definitely helps out a lot. And also, tell a friend. Share it on social media. I love hearing your favorite parts of each episode. We do occasionally answer listener questions on the show, so if you have a question, shoot it over to me on Twitter. I'm at jeffstaple. The Business of Hype is created in collaboration with Bryght Young Things. You can check out their work at byt.nyc. Our director is Daniel Navetta. Our audio engineer is David Rogers-Berry. Our associate producers are Sidney Pacampara and Christina Hong. I'm Jeff Staple, and you've been listening to The Business of Hype on HYPEBEAST Radio.